Hi, my name is Bridget Kromhout, and I work at a social commerce startup, definitely aspect ratio problems. Damn it. If your ping pong paddles look like this, you have problems. I work at a social commerce startup called 8th Bridge, and actually we were acquired about 3 weeks ago by a company called Fluid. So I think we're 8th Bridge, a fluid company right now. Something about fluid under a bridge. I have no idea what we're going to be called soon. But anyway, so very small dev team. I am the ops team, which means that I have no time to think about things like aspect ratios. And one thing that I discovered when I got there, because this startup had been, I joined a startup currently in progress, which meant that they had been MongoDBing their way to greatness for some years before I got there, which meant that there was some monitoring in place. The from zero part was a lie. There was some monitoring. Some of it was that twisty little maze of shell scripts that you all know and love. And there was actually also a set of cron jobs that their job was to go and look and see if the cron tab needed to be rewritten. When I talked about this at a different, at a local meetup, Jamie, the awesome guy who had actually written some of those, decided to defend them on Twitter, which I thought was hilarious. I was like, he didn't actually mean it, obviously, but it was hysterical because we are in Portland. Speaking of which, by the way, I'm really excited to be here at Monitorama. I'm even possibly just as excited to be on the stage on the set of Othello because, I mean, hey, Othello, awesome, right? And in Portland, you have to have bespoke artisanal everything. And in Portland, you also, if you're thinking about Othello, it makes me think of Jealousy, the green-eyed monster, and I've been watching everyone's presentations today and having all of that jealousy about the exciting tools that people have the bandwidth and time to actually use and do and develop, which is cool. And it also makes me think about, like, okay, in some cases, it doesn't actually make sense to use the exciting tools if you are a tiny startup with that Chris's graph of like, do you have all of the money, or are you looking at your runway and deciding how many things you can run on T1 micros? And I can give you one guess as to which end of that we were on until just recently. So we were using New Relic when I got there. The problems that we ran into with it were that we couldn't afford it, to be perfectly honest. And the way we had it configured, we were actually getting a lot of New Relic straight into PagerDuty, waking us up in the middle of the night for things that were not actually actionable in any way. Not New Relic's fault, but it was things like, at the time we had a product that we had since, when I joined, we were about a year and a half ago, we were in the process of pivoting away from, which was basically like a named pipe on Facebook to Ticketmaster. So this meant that whenever tickets went on sale that somebody wanted to try to scalp, they would sit there trying to game this Facebook app so that they could buy as many tickets as possible, which of course would lead to errors out of our session server, which would lead to us waking up in the middle of the night and going, oh, pink tickets just went on sale, fantastic, and then going back to sleep. So not actually the kind of alerts you want to be getting. So yes, the fact that we couldn't afford the New Relic package that we were, and I've looked at, when I was like putting this talk together, I was like, I'm going to be fair, I'm going to look at the pricing now. Oh look, they have all sorts of interesting pricing models that would work for a startup like us. But a year and a half ago, the pricing model was like, and then you add hosts and terrible things happen to your bill. And we just couldn't deal with that. So that was one motivator, and the false positive alerts were another motivator for making that not our main monitoring system. But let's be honest, this, see if I know how to use that. Oh. This was probably the main motivator. The fine folks at Opsmatic have something on their website about how being on call should not be like having a newborn. And this is an artist rendition of what our sleep was like back then, because I didn't have a Jawbone up back then. I do now. This particular orange bit at 3 in the morning, I can probably blame on HBase. By the way, Pete, are you the one calling me the HBase lady? Isn't that like the crazy cat lady? But anyway, so we were doing an awful lot of hating on PagerDuty, but it wasn't PagerDuty's fault. It was that we were telling PagerDuty to wake us up in the middle of the night. And that needed to change. So I changed it do something awful looking. Because, yeah, this isn't an artist's rendition. These are actual screen caps from our actual Nagios. And it does look every bit as horrible as you remember, which, as it turns out, the developers on our team didn't love, and they were sad. And they were like, but New Relic was so pretty. Why do you make us look at the sadness and the badness? And I mean, the point was, yeah, it's not so much that we're looking at it, is that it's not waking us up when it shouldn't. So, and then I actually was really, sidebar, there are many digressions in sidebars. If you took any computer science classes when I was taking them, and they love to teach you things in Lisp, and it was all cars and kudadadadars, so there's going to be digressions. You're warned. So, parens, I'm not the only person who actually, still uses Nagios. I love Etsy so much for so many reasons. 2 of my sisters have Etsy shops, and they love it, but I love them for other reasons. And Lori's great post a couple months back was one of them. Yeah, so yes, Nagios is hideous, but at least everything is exactly where you left it in 1912. And yes, the new shinies and sexies are really great, but one of the pieces of our let's just put it this way, MongoDB was not the scariest thing in our infrastructure when I started. We actually did have some RabbitMQ, and possibly it wasn't RabbitMQ's fault, but that shit was whack. All right, that shit was so unstable that when I looked at Sensu, I saw that, oh dear me. I saw that part, let's see if I can figure out how to use this clicky thing. I saw that part in the middle and ran away in fear. I was like, I can't possibly have that doing our monitoring. And so for those of you who are using it successfully, I will, Catherine and company, I'm going to have to talk to you and find out how you use it without being terrified of the RabbitMQ part. Do you have Nagios watching the RabbitMQ part? No? No? All right. You say so. I believe you. But yeah. Laurie also had something hilarious in his post, which you should definitely go read. I'll put these slides online later so you can look in the correct aspect ratio. He had something hilarious in his post about the number of colorful arrows that in your architecture diagram says something too, so I don't know. But anyway, so then our devs started not loving Nagios because I made it too chatty. And, or, to be fair, they added some alerts too, but that's very much like what, who was it? I want to say Chris, but somebody earlier was saying something about how, I think it was you. You said as soon as your customer or your boss is the one telling you about a problem, you just go ratchet up the chattiness, which we did with predictable results, so no one loved that either. But, yeah, the cloud board, you are correct. I'm not following cloud board or DevOps board or whatever because really everyone I know retweets this stuff when it's hilarious. So I did eventually realize that it made a lot more sense to every time I set a new alert, just set it to email just me for the first n minutes, seconds, whatever, so that everyone doesn't have to be aggravated by it when I inevitably make some incorrect assumption. Because that never happens. For example, yes, I mentioned HBase earlier. So yeah, we do have MongoDB, and some parts of it, being MongoDB-ish, means that some parts we're mostly using as a transactional data store. And the social commerce thing I alluded to earlier all has to do with getting people to auth these delightful Facebook apps, which then pour delightful data into HBase, and then we run MapReduce jobs. And then retailers get deep insights. I think that's what's in the pitch deck. But anyway, so it does mean that there's a bunch of data. Not like Twitter firehose size of data, but I don't know, what do they say about big data? It's like too big for Excel, or I don't know, whatever. Enough data that you want to look at something like HBase or Cassandra or whatever. And as soon as you start actually running this stuff, you notice that, this was probably in one blog post that I was reading when I was trying to figure out how to monitor this stuff. I was like, yeah, I have no idea how to pronounce that word. I'll look it up. Paucity, yes. Hadoop does not suffer from not having enough configuration options. That is not one of the things that it suffers from, which means that there are a billion things you could be monitoring. Of course, I tried to monitor all of them at first. It turns out monitoring most of them actually made no difference whatsoever to whether or not HBase was working. Spoiler alert, often it wasn't at first. But as it turns out, the internal to HBase equivalent of FSCK actually tells you if it's working. So again, the composability of something like Nagios, and don't tell me that your off-the-shelf, super awesome fill in the blank here, we'll do exactly this. Just glue together your scripts, actually ask the thing that can tell you the real answer, and Nagios gives you the real answer. So that's one of the examples of the sort of thing that I found was actually helpful in our use case. Yeah, MongoDB. I can just say that and Catherine starts laughing. Or cringing. Weeping? I think weeping is what's going on here. So yeah, I did walk into a MongoDB situation currently in progress, and I don't know, what do they say you're supposed to do when you walk into like a burglary or whatever, so just back away slowly. Not always an option, as it turns out, but there is a reasonably decent Nagios plugin, or compatible with Icinga, or how do you, I always want to say that like Icing A, but it's Icinga? How do I actually say that? I have no idea. Icinga? Okay, all the words that you see written, and you're like, I don't know how to say this, but I'm at a monitoring conference. Everyone here knows how to say these things. Or they can come up with their own versions. But anyway, so there's a decent plugin for that. And of course it did almost everything, but not exactly everything I wanted, so I had to go and change it to make it do more things I wanted. And then I was like, hey, I'm working at a startup in this exciting open source world, and I can actually contribute to someone's open source project. Oh my God, this is terrifying. Because if try to remember back to a billion years ago when you contributed the first time to an open source project, if you ever, a billion years ago, maybe if you can remember. And it is really scary the first time to wonder if they're going to accept your pull request. And in this particular case, it did. I was very happy. And that's good because, as it turns out, our MongoDB stuff, Chris was also talking about Holiday, and yeah, our MongoDB stuff did some really unfortunate things for us right around Cyber Monday. I didn't like that term before, and I have a whole, now working with something mildly associated with web and retail, in that we were on a major retailer's front page that weekend. I have a whole new opinion of that word. And this is, the green is requests per second, and the blue is what happened to our response time on Cyber Monday. And because HBase had been being so particular, at first it looked like that's what that was, and it looked like, oh, maybe, as you start digging into, like Chris was saying, I'm glad our talks are right next to each other, because so many of the exact same thing, I'm like, yes, everything you were saying. So many of the, so much of the time, the one thing that's been a problem lately, or the new thing, you're looking at and thinking, maybe that's it. But it turns out that it wasn't. Spoiler alert, no, it wasn't. Our response time started going to shit because, back to our original villain, the villain of the piece that's like twirling the mustache and the butler did it or whatever, and they've been in the background all along and you didn't actually realize what they were up to. We didn't actually have the faintest idea. Well, I mean, I knew that there was this global write lock, and somehow in 2.2 everything became better. No. It's not a write lock, it's a read-write lock. And it didn't become better in 2.2 so much as it just became database-wide and not entire server-wide. Unfortunately, if you have one particular collection in a database that's getting written, say a tracking collection, because when somebody set something up a long time ago, like Catherine said in her talk, no devs ever sit there and say to themselves, I want to make things terrible for operations. I'm going to make this decision that's a design decision that's a terrible idea for the future. No one thinks like that. But when you're small, it doesn't seem like having this one tracking collection that's being written to is going to cause terrible, terrible problems when it starts being written to a lot. And you can see that our write lock was starting to get worse for a while. The dangers of the hubris being that we thought we had monitoring under control, but the write lock was always kind of sketchy, and I didn't think it was that big a deal. And then actually looking at MMS, yeah, it was kind of a big deal. When I last looked a couple months ago, you still couldn't alert on the write locks on a per database level. You could still only alert globally, which is not really all that helpful. But in this particular case, we were able to solve it, everyone jumping into IRC and being like, what's going on? You can see it was very abruptly solvable just by getting that one collection out of that database. But it's the sort of thing where, even if you're web scale, it's easy to say in hindsight, oh, we should have been monitoring or at least paying attention to our monitoring of this specific thing. Yeah, okay, now we know. now people will never, they'll take off their shoes till the end of time because we're solving this problem that won't happen again because now there will be new problems. But that does kind of mean that going with, back to Etsy, going with their theory of, hey, as long as we're tracking everything, is my mic still on?
Is it your hair in your mic?
I don't think so. Maybe. At least my hair isn't causing the problem that it did when I shot a video for O'Reilly's ops school. It was last fall, and I had green hair, and I'm in front of a green screen. And they asked me if I could pull it back enough so that it didn't look like they could see through my head. It's like, oh man. I was like, sorry, Patrick. But anyway, so yeah, I started paying a lot more attention to the graphite stuff we had at that point because it was useful to be able to see a little bit more than we were seeing about what was going on with, say, our response times or whatever. And one thing that I noticed is that we had graphite installed by like someone who didn't even work there anymore a couple years before, but it was super old. And our StatsD situation was slightly less old, but kind of terrifying. Because as it turns out, and this is a real screenshot.
I see no problem with any of those things.
This is a real screenshot from the internet from somebody who I'm not going to name check because really I've seen this more than one place. But running things inside screen does not make them a daemon. Just saying. I mean, I'll run my IRC sessions inside screen, but other than that, no, it doesn't make it a daemon. So when I started trying to clean this up, I mean, it was easy to rush to judgment and say like, this is the wrong way to do things, blah, blah, blah. But, all right, it is at the same time when I'm trying to set up a new graphite and a new StatsD, I don't know how to set these up. So yeah, of course, I'm reading guides and looking at community cookbooks and looking to see how other people have said to do it. And the StatsD cookbook that I found that worked really well for me was great. The graphite ones, then you get into the technical debt of we haven't actually upgraded from Chef 10. Oops. So many wonderful looking cookbooks that are also tempting, and back to the green-eyed monster of Iago's jealousy. Here we are on the stage with Othello. And yes, haven't had time to do that. So, and we're using Nginx. And even though some of the good cookbooks out there are like, and here's the Nginx support, it's not exactly the same as the Apache support. So I did roll my own, and I'm a terrible person because I haven't actually decontextualized it from our organization enough to make it a community cookbook. But I will. See, I've said that now in public. I will actually publish our graphite cookbook. And when I got the new servers set up, they were awesome, except for the part where they didn't work. And again, back to our good friends at Etsy. This one's not even on the Code as Craft blog, but it should be because there was a lot of really good stuff in there in John Gula's blog post about how to actually use TCP dump to figure out why your StatsD and graphite don't work. The reason it turned out to not work is possibly the fault of someone in this room. I have no idea. But as it turns out, if you're going to put breaking changes in your point releases that make things not backwards compatible, so that Jason's laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. If somebody tries to upgrade but bring their old config file along and they don't, it is not like they, are leaving out something that they have. Oh, wait. I'm not actually mad at whoever made this change so much as I'm mad at the person who did not accept the pull request from some dude to fix the documentation. That's been sitting there for 6 months now, by the way. Just putting that out there. It's like, So, yeah, so that's what I call it now. But anyway, so minor setbacks like that aside, TCP dump cures all ills. So I was able to actually, the happy ending is I was able to actually upgrade our graphite and StatsD. Thanks to forward all equals true being a new excitingly mandatory setting. Because why would I want to actually forward things? But anyway, one other thing I want to shout out to Scott Sanders, is that your name? Is he here? Because I actually found carbonate to be super helpful when actually cutting us over from the old to the new. Because even though it says utilities for managing graphite clusters, and we're not fancy, we don't have a cluster. We have, I think it might be an M1 medium now, you know, but there is one particular utility in there that was actually really useful. The whisper fill utility made it really useful really easy to cut over from one to another when we were ready to cut over. So I found that really helpful because as it turns out, if you have a whole bunch of stuff, you know, like, oh, I don't know, the host name of the special Snowflake server that your statsd was running on in the screen session, hard-coded into code, and then you have to run a deploy to actually fix all of this and make things point at a CNAME. As it turns out, not everything starts going to the new one immediately. So there was definitely backfillage that had to take place. So shout out to that quite excellent tool. And I've actually been, because I just don't want to think about AV things, I've been ignoring the fact that this stupid thing won't go away, but that means that it's covering up something I wanted to show you, so let's see if I can make that go. See, I know if I make that go away, though, if I press play. Nope. Sorry? I can't hear you. Anyway.
Drag it off the screen. Click outside of it. Reboot.
I know, right? That solves everything. Okay, so there. No? It's fine for a minute, and then not. I hate computers. How even is computer?
Off the bar.
That's what I'm trying to do.
So just leave it right there.
Yay! And see, I wasn't even looking at my screen, so I wasn't paying attention to that until now. The danger of not looking at your screen. But anyway, so this is an example of something that has happened to us. The funny thing about this one is time shift, yay. The funny thing about this one where it says Friday, 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 Friday. It's like monster truck rally. And also, it was literally like several different Fridays, like 3 Fridays in a row. This is what the traffic looked like from one of our clients. And it's because we're the dreaded third-party cookie. We're the third-party component on a retailer's website, which means that sometimes they'll make a decision that they think we're somehow making them slow. We're not what's making them slow. The calling of the exact same, blue arrow 800 times is what's making them slow, but they don't want to hear that. Sometimes if a decision is actually made to take us off, it's really abrupt and obvious, and it's easy to see that kind of change in traffic. But back to some of what we were talking about earlier, there is a slightly more subtle drop in traffic that we've also seen, which is just somebody at a different third party who helps control their website rolls bad code, and at a 4 a.m. sort of time frame, deploys code that takes us off the site, but we don't have any kind of abrupt drop in traffic. So some of the stuff earlier, that the KS test and whatnot looked really interesting to me because I think I can probably do something with that can make it easier for us to detect this sort of thing, because right now I'm trying to do it with just setting thresholds for what I think traffic should be at certain times of day, which is obviously super fragile and brittle and not perfect, but it's like, well, you have to have something, right? But I wanted to also mention that when we realized that we did not in any way have the budget for the awesome stuff that we were getting from New Relic, we did end up putting Sentry in place, which is a decent enough tool. And one of the kind of things that we were able to do with that is just another open source application level error tool and whatnot. And I don't know how much of this you can actually see in the back, but this is an example of an API that an endpoint that we were exposing to a customer who was testing it, but it's not, it's some V2 whatever stuff that is, because everybody thinks that having the V2 version of their API will make everything better unless you have the stuff running on the same server, and yeah. But anyway, so we suddenly saw a huge rash of errors from something that shouldn't have even really been being hit by anyone except for this one customer who was testing it. And this was a really nice place where having a tool that actually told us, hey, there's something really bizarre going on here, made it possible to reach out to that customer, have our, delivery people reach out to that customer and get them to, because they're just sitting there going, we're trying to test out this new thing from this third party and it doesn't work. It's like, well, you're not using it in the way that we thought you were going to use it, and there's obviously communication issues there, and you don't have a setting set that we thought that was in the guide, so, or whatever. I'm not sure about those parts. But point being that that was a pretty useful tool. So for anybody who does need development on Sentry, finding that very helpful. Let's see. So we're actually using a whole bunch of different pieces of stuff, and this is sort of a graph of, or not graph, but sort of a picture of like which pieces are actually feeding into PagerDuty and which ones we just kind of look at sometimes for some things. And when we were, I guess when we were in the meeting, like, you know, with the whole being acquired or whatever, one of the questions that they asked our director of engineering is, why do you have so many tools? Can't you just pick one? And I was like, no. I mean, yeah, there's definitely overlap in what a bunch of these tools do, but some of them definitely don't overlap with each other. And no, we can't just pick one, and I'm not sure we would want just one. Jason has just one. Do you have the one perfect tool?
Are you monitoring PagerDuty with Pingdom?
No, we have. That'd be pretty funny. That'd be awesome. No, we have external checks from Pingdom feeding into our PagerDuty, like alerting. Maybe that arrow doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I was trying to go with, this is the direction the information flows. So we do have some external checks from Pingdom just telling PagerDuty. You're just giving me a hard time. Thanks a lot. That's awesome. Jason is awesome, everybody. Can we have a round of applause for Jason just right now? Yes, no, you are.
Thanks for that.
So, but in any case, so there are pieces of this that, yes, you're looking at this and you're going, why don't you have an arrow there? Yeah, I know there are pieces of this I'm doing wrong. It's okay, I know. I mentioned the one ops person, right? So in this exciting new world where we theoretically have money and we are in a different place than that T1 micro side of the scale, I'm definitely interested in the, you know, doing a lot more with our CloudWatch and doing a lot more with MMS. And that should be pretty exciting. We'll see. Maybe doing a lot more with things that aren't MongoDB. That would be also awesome. But right now, this is the stuff that we have, and it is a lot better than the twisty maze of little shell scripts, all alike or all different, but different in, you know, subtly terrible ways. So right now, I have this giant wish list of things that I want to do, and I swear to everyone here that even though I was last night talking to Rashid and Torkel, like, I didn't make this slide after I talked to you. I actually had this all done before I got here. I did just set up a whole Logstash Kibana Elasticsearch thing because we have pieces of our logs that, like our Nginx logs and our uWSGI logs, that we really only look at them if something seems to be going wrong. But since so many instances are getting, basically disposable instances in EC2, we just don't keep those logs around. But there has occasionally been a time where it's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if? So that's where I think that's going to come in handy. Even though Graphite is obviously a lot easier on the eyes than Nagios, for example, it still isn't the default Graphite, you know, interface, the composer and whatnot, still isn't, in terms of, you know, producing the graphs that are going to be that gorgeous. It isn't necessarily what you want it to be, but Grafana looks super awesome, so I'm really excited about the workshop on Wednesday for that. I've had Etsy's, you know, Kale stuff on my to-do list for quite a while, and I'm really actually hoping that this year, man, it's like this year. And I did actually install the Nagios API stuff a while ago, and one of the things that our acquirer is doing a lot of that we aren't is Hubot stuff. So I'm really excited about, you know, being able to make Hubot do more of the Nagios things. So we can never, ever go to the Nagios interface. That would be awesome. And I don't think that there is an answer to what the perfect monitoring is. I mean, I don't think I have the answer, and I'm not convinced that there is an answer. But what's been really useful for us, at least, is limiting our monitoring to or rather, making sure our monitoring is finding the problems that are actually going to affect us, and making sure that we are only alerting on the ones that require you to wake up at 3 in the morning and care about them. Because if something wakes you up at 3 in the morning and then, you know, like the EMR service nanny has taken care of it by the time you fix it, nobody likes that. And the usable by everyone thing, I think doing more with Nagios API and doing more with Grafana is going to definitely increase that, because there's still some parts that only a couple of the backend, dev and myself feel comfortable using Nagios. So yeah, so to sum up, it's like those are the things that are at least the most useful for us. And I'm very interested in this stuff. I would love to talk more about it, as long as you don't want to talk to me about audiovisual stuff. My partner is actually an audiovisual professional, which means that like at our house, the FreeBSD boxes under the TV are mine, and all of the other audiovisual stuff he takes care of. So it's like, yeah, I would love to chat more about this stuff. If you have a hankering to talk at a DevOps Days, our call for papers for DevOps Days Minneapolis is open until May 23rd, so you should definitely check that out. And yeah, I'd love to talk more about any of this stuff. So yeah, that's my talk.
Any questions?
Yes.
So what's your choice of Nagios? Nagios is like the kid everybody wants to hate.
That's a really good question, and I meant to give a little more backstory on that, and I kind of jumped right in. I've been a sysadmin for a good long while, long enough that I poured one out for Sun Microsystems. But more than that, I poured one out for Sun OS 413. All right, what? But I had used Nagios a fair amount in the past. I had never set it up myself from scratch. When I went to go set up the chef stuff for it, I did end up like peeling apart the cookbook and just taking the NRPE stuff and using Chef for that, and special snowflaking the Nagios cookbook, because this was kind of the new relic bill is how many thousands of dollars, and you need to fix this now. And I was like, okay, I will fix this now. I can set up Nagios myself immediately. If I tell Chef to set it up, it might take several days, and I still don't really know what I'm doing with Chef. I know a little bit more Ruby now than I did a year and a half ago. But yeah, so I set up Nagios because I was pretty sure that I knew it would work, and I also was pretty sure I was able to set it up without too much of a barrier for entry, which I realize is not going to be the case for everyone ever. But since I had a reasonable amount of exposure to it, I feel comfortable setting it up. It's really, really bright out there, and I can't really see, so.
Have you looked at CheckMK?
I couldn't hear that, I'm sorry.
Have you looked at
CheckMK. I'm aware that it's a plugin, but I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it. A lot of the stuff that I have Nagios doing now is actually checking things on Graphite. So it's again talking about the whole threshold thing, and back to Dan's car alarms and smoke alarms. It's a lot more useful to have Nagios tell us if Graphite says that the average over n minutes has been doing this, as opposed to just, it hit this once. But yeah, I haven't looked at CheckMK specifically. So what would you suggest using it for? Like everything else here. Great.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Somebody over here?
Yes, I
Yeah,
do see
I'm
something.
curious what you want to get out of the Nagios API.
Mainly just to have like setting things into setting downtimes or acknowledging alerts. It would be nice to have an IRC or equivalent. We're using HipChat now. I would like to try Slack because it's the new hotness, but it's kind of we switched from IRC to HipChat because it fostered more adoption amongst the non-technical people in the organization. And Slack might be a little too exciting for some of them. We'll see. At least HipChat is Atlassian, whatever. So, but anyway, so being able to have the acknowledgements and the setting things into downtime or out of downtime happening, by hitting an API endpoint, as opposed to going and interfacing with the dreadful Nagios website, is what I'm most interested in.
Anybody else?
All right.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.